to President Bill Clinton. I'm talking about Keith Boykin, who joins us right now. Mr. Boykin, I do appreciate you taking the time to join us. How are you, sir?
Hi, Brian. I'm doing well. I'm sorry. I've been trying to connect my microphone and it's not
Oh,
connected.
you sound okay. You sound loud and clear, Keith. So thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let me start by saying this. I am not a Stefanik fan. I'm not a Donald Trump fan. With that being said, I thought it was a fair question to ask. What did you think of the answers that all three presidents had in regard to that questioning? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the problem was that the presidents of the universities were giving very specific, very prepared, legalistic answers to a very political question. And I don't think it's like bringing a legal brief to a gunfight. And clearly, at least Stefanik had an agenda, and clearly, the university president should have been prepared to know what that agenda was. And after weeks of controversy, they should have had a better answer. I think that they were getting ahead of themselves because there is a question that is raging online about whether certain phrases constitute calls for genocide. So, for example, if you talk about if you use the word intifada, which in Arabic means shaking off, people are interpreting that to mean that you're calling for genocide. Or if you use the term, which is more controversial, from the river to the sea, meaning that Palestine will be free from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, or vice versa. That is a reference to a call for genocide as well. And I think that there's a place where the university presidents could have debated that point. I'm not sure they wanted to debate that point, but they could argue that we've heard people say those things, but we haven't heard people explicitly call for genocide on our campus. But instead, I think they were so afraid of being caught in this gotcha question that they just deferred to what the lawyers told them to say, which is legalistic answer. It depends on the circumstances, blah, blah, blah. And, it reminded me of another moment in history, which I don't think everybody really knows about, or people not everybody may be old enough to remember. But I worked on Michael Dukakis' campaign back in 1988. And I remember at one of the debates, I was assigned to travel with the candidate on the plane, press plane. I remember one of the debates, he was asked by Bernard Shaw, CNN news anchor, if Kitty Dukakis, his wife, were raped and murdered, would he support the death penalty? And Dukakis was famous for opposing the death penalty. Right. It was a crazy question to ask, and you would expect some sort of passionate response, because of that question. But he gave a very lawyerlistic legal response, almost no emotion, no passion, no sense of the moment. And I felt like these three presidents did the exact same thing in this moment. Maybe what they said was technically true in terms of interpreting their school's policies, but in terms of being able to rise to the occasion, I think they missed the moment.
Yeah. So Keith, I pretty much agree with everything you said. And I also agree with you that, Stefanik is somebody, she's never criticized Donald Trump. I've seen some of your commentary on that. You're absolutely right. When it comes to racism or anti-Semitic statements, she's never called out Donald Trump. We know that we know that, she probably wants to be Donald Trump's vice president. I'm with you on that stuff 100%. I just feel like, as somebody who is Jewish, and I don't think you have to be Jewish to be offended by the way some of these presidents answered or their lack of answering some of these questions. As a whole, from a simplistic point of view, if you're talking about the genocide of Jews, I just think the answer should be yes. I don't think you should be talking about context. I don't think you should be listening to attorneys. Just say yes. For the most part, we don't want those people on our campus. And I think if any of those presidents answered the question in that way, I don't think we'd be talking about it today.
Well, I think that's true in the sense that, the word genocide has a very clear and provocative meaning to people, especially in light of the Holocaust, in light of what's taking place in certain countries still today and what has taken place historically. And so the failure to recognize that moment is disappointing for sure on the point of all three university presidents. And I think that the presidents are attempting to navigate this political crisis or drama on their campuses where it's difficult to figure out what people can and can't say and how things will be interpreted. Now, genocide seems like that would be an easy one to answer. But the problem is, again, Brian, as I go back to what I was saying before, is that there are some people who are saying that even using the term intifada is a form of calling for genocide. And I think that what these university presidents were doing to avoid making a statement that would force their universities to take action against people who were using the term intifada, is they were trying to hedge and trying to give a legalistic
Right.
answer as opposed to saying how they would. I think if we hadn't had this controversy and if there hadn't been October 7th Hamas attack, if they were just asked the question in general, I think we'd gotten a totally different answer.
Yeah.
But because everything has changed since
Yeah.
October 7th, it's hard to sort of pull it apart and figure out where we are. But there's a really it's a difficult time for people to speak clearly about anything, because anytime you do, you are subject to misinterpretation. I'll tell you, it's not been an easy time. I posted what was this, a month ago? This is there was I think it was in late October. There was a story that was reported widely that an airstrike had hit a hospital in Gaza. This
Mhm.
is not the Al Shifa hospital; it's another hospital incident.
Mhm.
And it was widely reported. The New York Times, ABC News, several other media outlets. I posted this story on Twitter with a video clip from the ABC News report itself, just simply reporting what it said. And people attacked me for posting this.
Yeah.
Later on, there was some controversy about whether this actually took place and who was actually responsible for it. And so ABC withdrew its story, retracted its story, or not retracted, but they deleted it from
Right.
from Twitter. So mine was deleted as well, but someone captured that post that I reposted and a screen cap, and they put it up on their page and said that Keith Boykin is promoting anti-Semitic tropes and promoting
Yeah.
genocide. All I did was report what ABC News reported in a news incident. I don't know what happened. I just reported what I was
No,
told.
I would never say that about you. Let me take it a step further, though. Keith Olbermann did pretty much the exact same thing. The next day, he took down his post. He said, "Hey, you know what? I'm sorry. I put up this story. It's not factually accurate." Were you able to do that, or do you feel like you have the need to do that, or you needed to do that?
In this case, there were conflicting accounts for several days, including the New York Times, about actually what took place.
Mhm.
And this is one of the problems I think we're dealing with war itself, because they say the first casualty of war is truth. It's hard to figure out what exactly is happening, and I'm of the belief that I'm anti-war in general, but I'm
Sure.
of the belief that both sides are probably lying about some things or another.
Right.
And the only way to come to the truth is to have independent arbiters, whether it's the news
Mhm.
media or outside organizations, the UN, or someone the Red Cross is able to verify what's factual and what's not factual. Uh,
Right.
like
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're living in misinformation times. We could be talking about the vaccines, we could be talking about COVID, we could be talking about the 2020 election, or we could be talking about a bomb that hit a hospital in Gaza. So I'm with you 100%. With that being said, you've been doing this for a very long time. Are you worried? Are you worried about what's going to happen in the next year? Are you worried that there is a base of the Republican Party, a large base, the MAGA base, that still believes Donald Trump won the 2020 election? They still believe, in this, whether it be the Hunter Biden laptop stuff or really just in general that Joe Biden's a pedophile. I mean, where we can go down that road. Does it worry you at all that there are so many Republicans out there that believe this stuff?
well, yes and no. It worries me because it's a danger to our democracy. But the only reason why I have a little bit of pause is because I think that there is a ceiling to that. There's a poll that came out today, a New York Times Siena College poll, I believe it was, that showed that there is a great deal of dissatisfaction with the way President Biden is handling the crisis in Israel, for example. I know you're not asking a question about Israel in
Sure.
particular, but I noticed there was a divide between Democrats, Republicans, young people, and old people.
Mhm.
And I think part of what we saw in that particular poll is that Democrats are divided about the president's policies. There,
Mhm.
Republicans are unanimously opposed to what the president is doing because he's Joe Biden, regardless of what he says. But when asked about whether which president would handle it better, I think more people said Trump than Joe
Mhm.
Biden, and that was because Republicans are willing to agree with whatever Donald Trump says.
Right.
And so whatever reality that Donald Trump creates, whether it's about Israel or the 2020 election or the 2024 election, or if it's about the economy or anything he talks about, the alleged witch hunt to go after him, um, he has a base of people who will believe that no matter what.
Yeah.
That's what's
Yeah, I agree.
disturbing, but I don't think that that's the majority of the population. I'm sure it's not a majority of the population. Democrats have won the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections,
Right.
including both of the elections where Donald Trump ran for president.
Mhm.
So what worries me is that I think that progressives and Democrats will become so divided that they won't turn out to vote. I'm
Yeah,
not
you're
I'm not
right.
worried about the Trump people. The Trump people are going to be Trump people regardless. They're not going to change
Sure.
their mind no matter what. I'm worried the Democrats won't show up to the polls.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you're just joining us, he is Keith Boykin, a former White House aide to President Bill Clinton. I love his political commentary. You've seen him on all the networks. All right, so let me ask you this. Where do you think we're going to be a year from now? Do you believe that it will be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump? If you don't, tell me who you think steps in there. And who do you think Donald Trump chooses as his vice president?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's been obvious since the beginning that it's going to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, um, and I don't think there's any scenario in which Joe Biden leaves or decides not to run. And I don't see any scenario in which Donald Trump decides not to run or is not the nominee. Um, and there's two reasons for that. One, for Biden, unless he dies, he's going to be the nominee. There's no way Democrats going to pick anybody else. Period. And for Trump, unless he dies, there's no way the Republicans will pick anyone else. And even if they do pick someone else, there's no way Trump will allow them to do that. Even
Mhm.
if he loses every single primary, he will destroy the entire Republican Party before he allows any other
Yeah,
candidate, Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or anyone, to be the candidate over him.
yeah.
So the only option is death or these two guys. And
I've said the same thing, Keith, on my show. I think the only thing that will stop either is if they lose their life. I wanted to ask you this from your perspective. As a black man, when you hear Byron Donald speak about Donald Trump and attempt to try to talk about race relations, or Tim Scott. I mean, I had Larry Elder on the show a few months ago who says that systemic racism doesn't exist, which I think is utterly ridiculous. When you hear these people speak, these black men or black women, it could be Candace Owens as well. What goes through your mind? Do you feel like they actually believe this stuff, or are they just saying it so that they can sell a book and make appearances on Newsmax and Fox News?
well, they're different people. Larry Elder is different from Candace Owens. And I think Candace Owens just says whatever she can to sell a book or to promote herself. Larry Elder, I think, is probably more of a true believer. Um, then there are people like Herschel Walker, who I think he actually is a believer. He's just an idiot. And there are other
Agreed.
people who are just kind of opportunist. My friend Clay Kane has a new book coming out next month called The Grift, where he talks about how the black Republicans have basically been exploiting this for some time now in order to make a buck off of it.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be people like that. I'm not, there were black people during slavery who supported their enslavers,
Mhm.
and there were black people during segregation who didn't approve of the civil rights movement. There will
Mhm.
always be a small number of black people who will seek some sort of benefit from aligning themselves, associating themselves with white supremacy. I see
Right.
that happening in the future, but the vast majority of black people will not vote for them. In fact, black women in particular are the most loyal constituency of the Democratic Party, giving 90% or more of their vote to presidential candidates in practically every single election. And
Mhm.
black men are not as loyal, but we're pretty much close to it in terms of
Mhm.
80 to 85% of black men consistently supporting for Democratic presidential candidates. So
Mhm.
the problem, I'm not worried about those two groups per se in terms of picking Trump.
Mhm.
I'm worried about people not showing up. I'm worried about people not being energized by Joe Biden. And it's not about, for Joe Biden, it's not even about his policy per se. I mean, I don't agree with every policy decision he's made, by the way.
Right.
A lot of things I disagree with. But I don't, even if he did everything that I wanted him to do and almost everything that most other black people wanted to do, he's still an old white guy in a party that is increasingly more pluralistic and diverse and wants younger people and people of color and women to be included in power. So I don't know what he could do to not be himself. And I think that poses a unique problem for him, especially with younger voters who don't like the idea of voting for these old people who've been around forever.
If it's not Joe Biden, I'm curious, Keith. I don't know if anybody's ever asked you this question, and I agree with you. It's going to be Joe Biden. But if it wasn't, can you name me a few people, Keith, that you could really get behind and say, boy, I want that person running as a Democrat for president of the United States? They're a slam dunk. They would defeat Donald Trump. Now, I know Michelle Obama won't run, but to me, that would be the slam dunk. But can you name me a few people that you would support?
Well, there's a lot of people out there who, I don't want to say that they should run it in place of Joe Biden, but I think people who have potential to run for 2028 or something were to happen in 2024. But we all know Gavin Newsom wants to run for president. I'm in California. He's
Right.
He's made it very clear. He's debating Ron DeSantis. He's doing everything he can, but actually run for president.
Mhm.
We all know that Gretchen Whitmer is a potential candidate, the governor of Michigan. Obviously, Kamala Harris has to be in consideration because she is the vice president. I think she's had a rough job because of the fact that she has to be a vice president to an unpopular president. But I think if she were on her own, she has some potential. Pete Buttigieg is someone people continue to bring up over and over again. I don't know if America's ready for an openly gay president, but he's a qualified candidate.
Agree.
So, there's a lot of, and I didn't support him at all in the last election cycle because I didn't think he was ready, but I do think he could now. So
can I pick your brain on this? Because tell me where I'm wrong on Kamala Harris. First of all, very educated woman, very intelligent. I have a lot of respect for her. I don't like the attacks on the right. You know what some of these extremists say, oh, she slept her way to the top. I think that's disgusting. She's a very intelligent woman and educated. With that said, why are we seeing, at least from the Democrats that I speak to, that she doesn't really resonate with a lot of people? I don't think she would defeat Donald Trump. Am I wrong in assuming that? Because I don't know her personally like you do. And where am I wrong on that? And what would you say about her where you think she would be able to defeat Donald Trump?
Well, there's two different questions. One is about her qualifications, and two is about her capacity to win. I think she's eminently qualified. I think she'd actually be a really good president. And I think she would actually deliver on a lot of issues that would surprise people and show some compassion on progressive issues where even Joe Biden hasn't done. Having said that, she's hamstrung because she is his vice president, and you can only do so much as vice president. When you are attached to an unpopular president, there's not much you can do to get out of that. But the second thing, and this is perhaps the most important thing, is that in our entire history as a country, we've only elected one person who was not a white man to be a president. And that was Barack Obama. He was also a man. But Hillary Clinton, who was probably one of the most qualified people ever to run for president, even though she won the popular vote, she lost to Donald Trump. And part of that is because we have a history of sexism in this country. I mean, practically every other major country has elected a woman as president. We have not. Kamala Harris has to deal with that. Plus, the intersectional problem of being a Black woman means that she's got to deal with racism and sexism, misogynoir, which makes it harder for her to even sort of to make an ordinary mistake. Every candidate makes mistake. Every person makes mistake. But when Donald Trump does something, we overlook. We maybe you and I don't know. Other people may not overlook it, but the vast majority of the public is willing to overlook all the crazy, ridiculous things that Donald Trump does. But if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris does one little tiny thing, it becomes a huge issue.
Completely agree. Yeah, yep, you're right. And I talked about this yesterday. I was speaking to a Trump supporter yesterday. It's almost like we've normalized what shouldn't be normalized, which is his despicable behavior. I mean, the things he says on a regular basis, and you and I agree on that. And, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, they don't want to cover it. Or if they talk about us, they'll say, oh, you guys are upset. You have Trump derangement syndrome. I think they have Trump derangement syndrome because they're so complicit. I mean, even Nikki Haley, who I have some respect for, she's not willing to really call out Donald Trump. She said he was fit to be president. What do you make of the fact that the Republican Party, they call themselves, for the most part, the law and order party, and many of these candidates that are running for president were asked, if he's a felon, will you still support him? And just about all of them, except for Chris Christie, raised their hand and said, yes, I'll still support him. What do you make of that?
Well, they're not a law and order party. We know this. I mean, the fact that they actually they sat there in the Capitol, members of Congress, while the insurrection was taking place, the most lawless attack on the United States government since the War of 1812. If there was never even an attack on the Capitol during the Civil War.
Mhm.
And after that, they still refused to certify. 147, I think, still refused to certify the election. They still supported Donald Trump. They still refused to hold him accountable in terms of impeachment and conviction. And the Republican Party issued a statement shortly thereafter calling the January 6th event legitimate political discourse.
Hmm.
How do you say you're a party of law and order when you're supporting the lawless thugs who tried to take over the United States government? That's just the epitome of hypocrisy. The only law and order they believe in is apparently locking up black and brown people. They don't believe in law and order for rich white guys. They don't want Donald Trump to be held accountable. They don't want their colleagues and peers to be held accountable. They want Democrats, black people, brown people, and women who dare to control their own body to be locked up.
And maybe Hunter Biden. That's probably the only gun they care about, right, Keith? Is the gun that Hunter Biden had. I wanted to ask you, do you remain in contact with Bill Clinton and the Clintons at all? Do you talk to them on a regular basis?
I have not spoken to Bill Clinton in years. I think maybe I might have seen him at an event somewhere. That was the last time I remember speaking to him. Nor Hillary Clinton, although she follows me on Twitter for some reason. I don't know why. She only follows a few people and she follows me. But I don't even know Hillary Clinton that well, but she chose to follow me. So
what do you think Bill Clinton would say about these times we're living in today politically?
Well, I worked for Bill Clinton, and I think he was, I was inspired to work for him. I was in law school when I first saw him speak, and I was inspired because I thought he was going to be sort of an idealistic progressive in the sort of Kennedy-esque style, but more progressive in policy. And he ended up being a real disappointment on those issues. I remember sitting in the White House once with him, and someone asked what he thought he'd be remembered for in history. This is early on. He said he thought it would be lifting the ban on gays in the military and healthcare reform, neither one of which he did. But instead, he's remembered for the impeachment with Monica Lewinsky and a strong economy. And so the economy is really what saved Bill Clinton. The fact that people were doing relatively well, the fact that he was able to raise taxes, the top marginal tax rate went up to 39.6%. And we still balanced the budget for the first time since the 1960s. Actually had a surplus. The economy is strong. People were impressed by this, and he kind of wiped away the whole reputation of the Democrats as being incapable of handling the economy. But I think he'd probably be looking at what's happening right now and saying that he's glad he's not president, because he wouldn't do well today in today's political climate, because we had just to step up real quickly. When Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992, the Democrats had lost 6 of the previous 7 presidential elections. The Democrats were in a disarray. They just really wanted anybody who could win. And Bill Clinton was the candidate who we thought could do it back in 1992, and he did. But now we're in a different political era where the Democrats have won the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections.
Right.
And so Democrats feel more emboldened, more progressive. We want universal health care. We want free college education or low or reduced college education. We want student loan debt relief. We want an anti-war party. We want a higher minimum wage or a livable minimum wage. We want criminal justice reform. We want climate change action. We want all these different policies that Bill Clinton wasn't able to do any of those things. He was just nibbling at the edges. So I think he would be, in some ways inspired by the fact that so many people were able to do these things, but he wouldn't be the person who'd be able to do those things today because he wasn't able to do those things when he was president.
Sure. Keith, a couple more quick questions for you, and we appreciate your time. When you hear a young black man or woman claim that Democrats aren't doing anything to help me, Joe Biden's not doing anything to help me, Donald Trump has done more for black Americans than Joe Biden will ever do, what is your message to them?
That's just not true. I mean, unless that person who received a direct benefit from Donald Trump, it's just not true. There's two or three things that people tend to mention about that. One is they talk about black unemployment. Well, black unemployment was the lowest level under Donald Trump. Well, you know what? It actually started going down under Barack Obama. Oh, and Donald Trump just inherited an economy that was strong, and it's actually gotten lower under Joe Biden. We've had the lowest black unemployment rate ever under Joe Biden. Second, they talk about HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and they say Donald Trump offered historic funding. Not true. He's the king of lies. He said this, but it's not true. Actually, there was no historic funding that came from Donald Trump. What actually came is the historic funding we have now for black colleges and universities that came from the Biden-Harris administration. Number three, they talk about, well, he released Alice Johnson from prison. Well, you know, Donald Trump only released Alice Johnson from prison because Kim Kardashian asked him to do it. And even then he wanted to get some sort of quid pro quo in exchange for it. But he also was the champion of locking more black people up in jail. He supported mass incarceration policies. He did nothing to move forward on criminal justice reform. So all those things are out the window. In contrast, the Biden administration, you know, is part of the whole Democratic policy legacy since the Civil Rights Act in 1964. No Democratic candidate for president has won the white vote since 1964, when Democratic President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act.
Right. Yeah.
Because most black people understand that. They understand that even though the Democrats haven't succeeded in everything they've tried to do, I'm not saying the Democrats are the best party ever, but even though they haven't succeeded in everything they've tried to do, they've definitely been head and shoulders above the Republican Party. The stimulus that everybody talks about that they think Trump gave them, well, Trump didn't give them that. That was Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Congress, who approved that, and part of it just had to happen to come through at the end of the Trump administration, the rest in the Biden administration. So you can go through example after example: voting rights, criminal justice reform, the unemployment rate. You can talk about healthcare, student loan debt relief. I was one of the people who's benefited from that. All those things are happening under a Democratic president, Joe Biden. He's not the best president. There's a lot more he could do. I'm not saying that, but he's definitely 10 times better than Donald Trump could even hope to be.
Agree. Okay, I want to pick your brain on one more political question here, because I interview Republicans all the time. I interview MAGA supporters all the time. When I bring up guns, two issues. They always want to bring up black on black crime and what's going on in Chicago. And of course, my response is, I don't care what the color of your skin is. Gun violence is gun violence. And then when I bring up January 6th, because I talk about January 6th a lot, they want to bring up Black Lives Matter protests and all the violence there. And what I say is, January 6th, they were there to try to overturn the outcome of an election, and some violent people did some violent things. And for the most part, Black Lives Matter protests, while a small percentage of them, I think you'll agree with me, were agitators and did some bad things, the overwhelming majority of the people there that were peaceful were there because they promoted equality. That's the argument that I try to make. But how do you deal with these Republicans when you bring up January 6th? They want to talk about Black Lives Matter. When you bring up gun violence and our kids getting gunned down in our schools, they want to talk about gang violence and the violence in Chicago. How do you respond to those people?
Well, that's why I just wrote a new book.
Let's talk about that. I want to talk about your new book as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the chapters in the book, the book is called "Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race?" and it debunks 25 of the most toxic racist arguments. And one of those arguments is about black on black violence. And that black people aren't doing anything about that. We're so focused on all these other issues and police violence. And the reality is, first of all, we are aware of it. We have been dealing with it for decades throughout my entire life. But that doesn't negate the fact there is still a serious problem of police violence and racist violence that's directed at black people. When people talk about, well, most of the violence against black people is from other black people. Yeah, of course. But if you look at the FBI data, most of the violence against white people is from other white people. Most crime in America is intra-racial, not interracial. And that's because we live in a segregated society primarily. And most people who commit crimes in their own communities and neighborhoods. So yes, black people commit crimes against other people, other black people, just as white people are more likely to commit crimes against other white people. That doesn't get talked about. But when a white person shoots, kills, or robs, or rapes a white person, nobody ever says that's white on white violence.
Right.
It's just violence. And
right.
And that's what we tend to ignore. As far as the January 6th insurrection is concerned, it's just more hypocrisy from the Republican Party. Again, we all know that the whole purpose of the insurrection itself, the reason why they stormed the Capitol, was to commit a crime. The crime was storming the Capitol and trying to stop the legal process of the transfer of government. in the case of Black Lives Matter, on the other hand, the whole purpose of the movement was to get people to take action about the injustice that was happening against Black people.
Right.
Now, there were people in that group, just as there is in any group of people who did violent things, who did things that were not part of the movement's cause or objective. But that shouldn't smear or tarnish the reputation of the entire movement itself. And on contrast with January 6th, the whole purpose was to do something violent. That was not the whole purpose of January 6th. I mean, of the Black Lives Matter movement. The whole purpose is what distinguishes those two events.
Yeah, no, correct. Extremely well said. I wanted to ask you about your book, which is coming out in 2024. And of course, I'd love to have you on when that book is released. But tell me a little bit about why you decided to write this book and an idea of when the book will be released to the public to buy.
Thanks. Well, the book comes out January 23rd. It's called Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? I decided to write it because, quite frankly, I spent 5 years on CNN working, covering the Trump administration from 2017 through 2021. And it was just exhausting. It was really exhausting as a Black man to have to deal with this. And the questions I was asked on a regular basis, the debates I had, and the Twitter nonsense that I heard, the questions were almost always the same questions over and over again. And so I felt like it was important for somebody sort of to respond to those questions over and over. The questions you hear, like, well, we gave you Barack Obama. What else do you want? Or why do you need to have a Black History Month? Why can't we have a White History Month? Or, affirmative action is just reverse racism. All these different things that people have an ahistorical understanding of American history, American government policy.
Yeah.
So they think that Black people were just out here demanding handouts and not understanding the whole history of how America got to be where we were. The fact that Black people helped to build, not only helped to, but contributed free labor for hundreds of years that helped to build this country through slavery. And then we're forced to work as second-class citizens through 100 years of segregation, and then followed by a period of mass incarceration, which we're still suffering through right now. And yet we just assume everything is supposed to be perfect, and Black people just shut up and not complain. So there were a lot of questions I wanted to answer in this book, and this book helps me to do that.
I can't wait to read it. Love to have you on again. I have to ask you one more question. I lied. I guess it's a two-part question. What are your thoughts on what happened to Don Lemon? You did Don Lemon's show plenty of times. What are your thoughts on that situation? And my second question is, if a guy like Tucker Carlson, who I believe is a white supremacist sympathizer, asked you to do his show when your book comes out, I'm curious. Would you go on that network, and would you go on, well, I know Tucker's not on Fox News anymore, but would you go on a Tucker Carlson-like show, Sean Hannity, if they asked you to?
Okay, so two really difficult questions, actually, for some reason. But so for Don, I know Don, we've known each other for a long time. And I think I don't want to say too much, but I'll say that I feel like I knew the handwriting was on the wall when they moved into the daytime morning show. That you put him up with two other people. He's a late night guy who's used to saying controversial things. You put him with two people who are on the morning show, who are supposed to be family friendly and all this, and it's just it felt like it was a setup for.
You think they did it on purpose?
I won't speculate about that because I might need to be on CNN at some point.
Well, that's what it sounds like you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth either, but that wouldn't surprise me. If they did do that, why do you think they did it?
Oh, I don't know. I can't really say that. I mean,
okay.
I feel like Don. I think Don was challenging for CNN, probably for any network, because he is kind of controversial and he does say what's on his mind. And there was a time when Black people didn't really like what Don Lemon said. I wrote an article back in the Huffington Post, I think it was years ago, criticizing Don Lemon for something he said about Black men wearing sagging pants or whatever. But we're friends still, so I don't know about that. In terms of the second part for Tucker Carlson, I'll say this. The last time I was on Fox News was when Bill O'Reilly was on. We were talking about Black Lives Matter. And he cut my microphone in the middle of my appearance. And I was so pissed off, I told him I would never come back. I've never been back on Fox News. And the last time I had a book that came out a few years ago, it wasn't a possibility for me to go on Fox News because I was working for CNN. I had a contract where I couldn't go there. But my publicist did ask me recently if I would go on Fox News if they asked me. So I said, well, I'm not opposed to it, depending on who the host is.
Well, here's why I think you should, and you're going to do what you want to do, but you're obviously an extremely intelligent guy, well-spoken, and I want people like you on Fox News. I want more Democrats going on Fox News. And listen, if somebody cuts your mic off, that's ridiculous. I'm not shocked that Bill O'Reilly would do that to somebody like you. Not shocking to me at all. But at the same time, I think you should, just because, give it to a guy like a Sean Hannity or a Laura Ingraham, whether it be the racism or the bigotry and what's going on over there at Fox News. I think, we need more people like you to go on that side. That's just my personal opinion, and give it to those guys. But Keith, I've always appreciated you, and I've always appreciated your political commentary. I think you're one of the best out there, and I'd love to have you on once again when your book is out, and I can't wait to read it. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure.
Appreciate that. That's Keith Boykin, everybody. Have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I really do. Really smart guy. Tells it like it is, but does it in an eloquent way and in an intelligent way. Very interesting what he said about Don Lemon there. I never really thought of it that. Makes sense, doesn't it? Again, I don't mean to sound like Robert